We have Ian Webster. Ian is the Managing Director of Axioma. Ian, my first question to you is, how has risk management changed since the financial crisis?
Well, everything's changed essentially since the financial crisis. And it's a bit of a truism to say that nobody wants to go through that experience again. But I think we have to admit that it's a little bit still work in progress about how we're going to ensure that risk managers can make clear what the risks are that any particular company is taking. That reality has really changed the industry, and consequently it's changed Axioma. Historically, Axioma was a firm that sold to the front office, it sold to CIOs, it sold to portfolio managers, and that's still a very large portion of our business. But those clients have been asking us over the course of the past few years to get into the risk management business. In our portfolio construction tools, we'd always allowed people to import risk models as part of their premise for constructing the portfolio. And they said, could we do that work for them? So in the late 2000, 2007, 2008, right at the heart of the financial crisis, we launched equity risk models. And then earlier this year, we moved into the multi-asset class space, allowing not just a portfolio manager to look at risk models, but to look at that risk control, risk management team to be able to do that. So we can see that risk management is at the forefront of the industry now, and therefore it has to be at the forefront of any financial technology firm, and that obviously includes Axioma. There's lots more risk managers about. There's chief risk officers, they're sitting on boards, they've got executive positions. The risk managers are being asked for all sorts of new data. They're being asked to run reports for the regulator, they're being asked to run reports for clients, for senior management, for portfolio managers. There's a whole host of stuff that is being asked to be done. And I think if we look at things is that perhaps the first response that risk has taken to the financial crisis is perhaps what I would call is a saturation approach. Let's just do more, and hopefully by doing more, things will be better.
But it's not really about having more risk managers on the street, is it, Ian?
I don't think it is. I think that's exactly the right point, which is that you can think of this as a sort of a police force. The risk manager is a police force. Is that the right way that risk management should be going? And is the notion that you have more people out there producing more reports, is that going to help the system? Is that going to help the crisis not come back again? Our view is that more is not sufficient. Obviously, it's necessary. One needs to get into more depth about what's going on, but it isn't sufficient. So there's vast amounts of data, there's vast amount of reporting that's happening, but is there really information in that? What we think about risk is that historically, it's been more of a diagnostic tool. People have been looking backwards within terms of risk, what's happened yesterday. What we're saying is use your risk tool to look forward, not what's happened, but what if? What if this scenario happens? What if the similar sort of scenarios happened that happened around the crisis? Think forwards, not backwards. Be ex ante, not ex post. And the root of the problem that we see it, and particularly coming from that front office experience, is that the investment process is to a degree fractured. Is that you will have portfolio managers building portfolios, and you will have risk officers reviewing those portfolios. And you're not necessarily thinking about the risks that you're taking when you're building a portfolio. You're subcontracting that risk control to a third party, obviously within the firm, but to a third party. So it's vitally important from our perspective that the risk manager and the portfolio manager really understand the same language. And it's unfortunate, risk management systems and portfolio management systems have developed in very different ways. They've developed very different sets of languages around these things. And consequently, there's a little bit of balkanization that we see in the risk management space, with the portfolio manager saying one thing, the risk manager saying something else. So it's really important that the firm looks at this across the enterprise. It looks at the issues across the asset classes, and it makes sure that it has the tools that are sophisticated enough to understand the interactions between all the various portfolios that are within the firm.
But so Ian, what's actually being done to overcome all these problems?
Well, as you know, the tools of risk management are extremely well documented. And in some senses, it's not that there aren't sufficient number of risk management tools, there's just a whole set of very different ones. So you can look at stress testing, you can look at VAR calculations, you can look at expected shortfall, you can look at factor models, you can look at granular models, you can look at sensitivities. And I could go on for quite some time listing these things, but that doesn't really make for a very interesting conversation. But what has happened is that many systems have grown up taking a particular view of the risk world. VAR's the right answer, or a factor model is the right answer, or sensitivities is the right answer. Our perspective is very clear, is that there isn't necessarily a single right answer, but you need a system, you need a tool that captures all these various means of looking at risk, having them in the same platform, understanding the interactions between these different measures, and obviously, importantly, having that on top of a consistent data source. One of my ex-colleagues many years ago said that risk management, 85% of risk management is really about data management. And I think that that's a very sound comment. And the fact that you've got a tool that Axioma has developed that has that consistent set of portfolios, and that you can then run a whole slew of different scenarios, a whole slew of different analytics on top of it, that helps the risk manager do their job in a more appropriate manner.
So how does that preventive medicine actually work like?
So from our perspective, risk management really needs to be at the heart of the investment management process. It doesn't need to be an afterthought. Is that so often you see the risk manager and the portfolio manager arguing about, is that number right? Is it right to the third decimal place? And our question to them is, you shouldn't really be arguing about whether that number's right or wrong. You should be looking at whether the risks that the company is taking are the appropriate risks. So if you've got a tool that can answer the questions that the portfolio manager needs answering and answers the risk manager's questions in the same toolkit, then you've already got over that scenario about arguing about numbers. And looking at a specific implementation that we're doing at the moment, we're spending just as much time talking to the portfolio managers as we are talking to the risk managers, and making sure that they understand between them what they want to view of any particular portfolio and can work like that. Now, one needs to think about this in a very practical way. I think that clearly one needs to be looking forward, not looking back. So that idea of running scenarios on the portfolios and not just running reports is very important. Looking at stress tests, don't just have a canned set of stress tests that you run on a day-to-day basis. Do configure your stress tests for different environments at different times, because what happened yesterday isn't going to be what happens tomorrow. So make sure that you configure things in an appropriate way, and you change that configuration over time. Our system makes it very easy for you to configure things in the way that you want it to be done. And then, of course, do this at the enterprise level. don't just think about this at an asset class level. Make sure that you're capturing all of the non-linearities in your portfolios, making sure you're capturing the risks of those new types of assets that are coming out. Contingent convertibles are all, everybody gets excited about those these days. So that it's important that you can create models very quickly that can support the new investment styles. But fundamentally, our belief is that a asset manager, a hedge fund, will be very successful in running their risk management function if and when they get their portfolio managers and risk managers to work together, and they both buy into a common infrastructure and buy into a common investment philosophy about how risk should be at the heart of those investment decisions that they make.
That is very good insight, Ian. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.